Shabbat Shalom.
I am Tazadok of the House of Judah Fellowship. This is Elder Nathaniel. And today's lesson will be entitled Ezekiel chapter 4, breakdown of Ezekiel chapter 4. All right? Breakdown of Ezekiel chapter 4. All right? Ezekiel chapter 4 is a now often used scripture to determine how long a Hebrew year is. It is important to understand that using Ezekiel chapter 4, it is possible to figure out how long a Hebrew year is, but it's also important to note that this is not what Ezekiel chapter 4 is talking about, right? That is not the central focus of Ezekiel chapter 4, right? A lot of people will look at Ezekiel chapter 4, look at the first 8 books of Ezekiel chapter 4 and think that all it's speaking about is the calendar. What we have to understand is, yes, the information within Ezekiel chapter 4 can help us figure out how long a Hebrew year is. That is not what Ezekiel chapter 4 is speaking of. Now, ideas such as the leap week have been created using Ezekiel chapter 4. So today, not only will we break down what Ezekiel chapter 4 is talking about, but we'll also break down how they got to the leap week. Okay? All right. So the book of Ezekiel chapter 4 in sum is only speaking of the iniquity of Israel and Judah, right? Laid on Ezekiel the amount of time that they sinned, right? So the amount of time that Israel and Judah sinned, that time was laid on Ezekiel, right? This has nothing to do with how long a year is. It has nothing to do with how long a year is, all right? So let's go to Ezekiel chapter 4 and get the understanding. All right?
Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 4. Lie thou also upon thy left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel on it, according to the number of the days that thou shalt lie upon it. Thou shalt bear their iniquity. Verse 5. For I have laid upon thee the years of their iniquity, according to the number of the days, 390 days. Thou shalt thou bear the iniquity of the house of Israel.
Okay, so let's break down this scripture verse by verse. So in verse 4, the Most High commands Ezekiel to lie on his left side for the iniquity of Israel. Everybody got that? It says the Most High commands Ezekiel to lie on his left side for the iniquity of Israel. And then he goes on in verse 5 and gives us the understanding that one day will represent 1 year of Israel's iniquity. Okay? So whereas they sinned 390 years, Ezekiel obviously couldn't lay on his side for 390 years. He was to lay on his side 390 days. Okay? 390 days for the iniquity of Israel. So Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 4 is only speaking about the iniquity of Israel right now. Right? And it later goes on in that verse, in verse 5, to give us the number of years Israel sinned against the Most High, that he will lie on his side 390 days. Right? So number 1, nowhere do they mention the amount of time in years or months he laid down. If this scripture was speaking of the amount of time, if scripture was speaking of how long a year was, it would tell us the time in years, not in days, right? Right? It would tell us, okay, he laid down for a year in such and such amount of months. However, it doesn't do that. It tells us the number of days. Why? Because as I'm going to point out in this next one of these next points, is that the number of years Israel sinned has no direct correlation to the time in a year, right? Israel could have sinned for 400 years. They could have sinned for 500 years. That has no correlation to how long a Hebrew year is, okay? So it doesn't speak of, it only tells us the number of days that he lies down. It doesn't put that into months. It doesn't put that into years. It just tells him the days, right? Gotcha. And number 2, The number of years Israel sinned has like I just said, the number of years Israel sinned has no direct correlation to the amount of days within a Hebrew year. Why? Because Israel wasn't saying, okay, guys, let's sin for 364 days so that way it lines up perfectly with the Hebrew year. Why doesn't it do that? Because it has absolutely nothing to do with what Ezekiel is commanded to do. Right? Number 3, the Most High is only speaking to Ezekiel at this time. This command was given directly to Ezekiel. So whatever he was doing, it applied only to him. Ezekiel was the only one laying on his side. Right? He was the only one laying on his side. This was only supposed to be a sign to Israel, right? It was only supposed to be a sign to Israel and Judah. All of Israel and all of Judah were not lying on their side for 390 days. Right? Ezekiel chapter 3 calls Ezekiel to be a watchman over Israel. This was his job only. This was a command that was given to Ezekiel directly. Right? It was to be a sign to Israel, not to show them how long a year is. They already knew how long a year was. Right? So, let's break down this sin of Israel a little bit deeper. So, questions that we're going to answer in this section right here. What was the iniquity that Israel committed? Or what was the sin that Israel committed? Why 390 days? And was this prophecy fulfilled? Okay? So, let's pull it all together one more time before we jump into the scriptures. So we see Ezekiel was lying on his side for 390 days, right? Each day for a year. To show the 390 days of iniquity, as well as it's to show the 390 years of iniquity between the start of the iniquity to the besiegement and destruction of Jerusalem, right? So it's a timeline. There were 390 years from the start of their iniquity to the besiegement and destruction of Israel, right? We all know Israel was taken into captivity to that time, to the destruction of Israel, right? So we're going to go to the book of Kings, which clearly highlights the sins committed by Israel. The first scripture, 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 16.
1 Kings chapter 14, verse 16. And he shall give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, who did sin, and who made Israel to sin.
Next scripture, we're going to go to Kings chapter 15, verse 30.
1 Kings chapter 15, verse 30. Because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he sinned, and which he made Israel to sin, by his provocation, wherewith he provoked the Most High, that power of Israel, to anger.
Okay, let's go to 2 Kings, last one, 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 29.
2 Kings chapter 10, verse 29. Howbeit, from the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, Jehu departed not from after them, to wit, the golden calves that were in Israel and that were in Dan. But Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Most High, that power of Israel, with all his heart. For he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, which he made Israel to sin.
Okay, so after reading all of the books of Kings, from 1 Kings to 2 Kings, it is obvious that Jeroboam, the former king of Israel, right? We know that Israel had been divided in half after Solomon, right? You had Rehoboam, who was over the Judah, Benjamin, and Levi in the southern kingdom, and you had the northern kingdom, which was all the 10 tribes, right? Jeroboam was over the 10 tribes. So we see that the former king of Israel, Jeroboam, caused the people to sin, right? And 2 Kings tells us that he introduced 2 golden calves. Where else did we see these golden calves? In the wilderness with Aaron, right? This means that Jeroboam led the 10 tribes of Israel astray with the idol worship of Yahweh, right? He led Israel astray with the same idol worship that we had with Aaron in the wilderness, right? The same thing. Same thing. We're always getting caught up in the same thing. This was the iniquity that the Most High was speaking of in Ezekiel chapter 4. Right? It's the same iniquity. It's the same iniquity. So according to 2 Kings chapter 10, verse 29 and 31, it does not end with Jeroboam either. It doesn't end with Jeroboam. Right? It passes down to Jehu. Jehu came behind Jeroboam and continued to do the exact same thing. From kingship to kingship, all the way down to their destruction. Right? Leading them further and further away from the Most High. Jeroboam's rebellion lasted 390 years until Judah officially lost their kingship. When Judah lost their kingship, that was when Ezekiel officially fell. At this time, the temple and the city in Jerusalem was also destroyed. Right? So we see this happen twice. Not only with the besiege in 70 AD, where we were besieged by Titus and the temple was destroyed. The temple was also destroyed the first time that we lost our kingship, when Israel was judged. Right? So I'm going to read this off the document. Jeroboam's rebellion lasted 390 years until Judah officially lost their kingship. At this time, the temple and city in Jerusalem was also destroyed. So the same time that they lost their kingship, the temple and the city of Jerusalem were also destroyed. This was the Most High's judgment on the house of Israel. Right? So that 390 years, at the end of that 390 years, there was a judgment. All right. So we just went over the history. This is the first fall of Israel. The fulfillment of this prophecy happened in the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign in Babylon, when Jerusalem was besieged for a year and 4 months before it surrendered. So we see the 390 years that Ezekiel is speaking of has already been accomplished. This prophecy has already passed, right? So the 390 years, notice how if you read Ezekiel chapter 4 fully, it says when your 390 days are complete, tear everything down. Tells him to tear everything down. That's because the model that he created was of Israel for the 390 years of mercy that the Most High had on. Right? So, we've established that Israel, they have 390 years of iniquity from walking away from the Most High for idol worship. Now, let's go to Ezekiel chapter 4 for the iniquity of Judah.
Ezekiel chapter 4, verse 6. And when thou hast accomplished them, lie again on thy right side, and thou shalt bear the iniquities of the house of Judah 40 days. I have appointed thee each day for a year.
Okay, so now Ezekiel is also being commanded to lie on his right side for 40 days, right? 40 days for 40 years of Judah's iniquity. Right? So it's the same thing as what we saw with Israel. Right? With Israel, it was 390 years of iniquity, and he laid down each day for a year. Same thing with Judah. Same thing we're seeing here with Judah. However, Judah's iniquity had to have been greater. It had to have been much greater for them to only receive 40 years, whereas Israel received 390. What did the house of Judah do worse than Israel for them to only receive 40 years of mercy? Right? So Judah's sin, we know that Judah's sin came about 1,000 years after Israel's fall, right? After Israel's judgment. This was in the time of Christ. Right? So let's count the timeline. You have 70 years of the Babylonian captivity. 70 years of the Babylonian captivity. Then you have 77 years in the time of Ezra, Nehemiah, and the rebuilding of the temple. And then you have a 490 year point from the decree to 34 AD, right? That is the time period, the time span that you have between their fall and Israel's and Judah's sin, right? So we know that Judah's iniquity began in 30 AD. Why? Because the Most High gave them 40 years before their judgment, right? Mm-hmm. And we know that Israel fell when? Under Titus in 70 AD, right? That places a perfect 40 years of sin in between. Everybody following? You have from 30 AD to 70 AD. That's a 40-year span in between. They had 40 years of sin before they were conquered by Titus in 70 AD. This is why Ezekiel was told to lie on his side for 40 days. This one for Ezekiel was a future prophecy. Ezekiel didn't live in the time of Christ. So with Israel already happened. This hadn't happened yet. When Ezekiel received this 40 years, it hadn't happened yet. So we're seeing here that this is a future prophecy. However, this was also fulfilled. This prophecy was also fulfilled, right? This was during the Roman captivity in the time of Christ. Judah's sin was different than Israel's sin, though, right? We've established that their sin had to have been worse for them to receive judgment before Israel did. Let's find out what that sin was. Let's go to Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 1.
Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 1. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron and with the point of a diamond. It is graven upon the table of their heart and upon the horns of your altars.
Wow. So Judah, whereas Israel forsake the Most High for other gods, Israel forsake the Most High for tradition and pride. Right? What did we see from the Pharisees and scribes? They were looking at the letter of the law, about how they were so worried about how they were dressed, they forgot about everything else. They neglected the Most High. This is why Judah's sin was greater. It says Judah's sin is written, the sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron. Right? So their sin was of tradition and pride. They rejected the Most High for tradition and pride. They only received 40 years. This prophecy was fulfilled in 70 AD when the Southern Kingdom was officially conquered and destroyed by Titus and the Roman Empire. This was when Christ said, when you shall see the city compassed with armies, flee into the mountains. This is what he was speaking of. This prophecy has already been fulfilled. So the meaning of Ezekiel chapter 4 is simply speaking of the prophecies that would take place, past and future, for Israel and Judah in the time of Ezekiel, right? For Ezekiel, Israel had already happened. However, for Ezekiel, Judah hadn't fallen yet. So this was a past and present future for Ezekiel, prophecy for Ezekiel. Does everybody understand? That is the true understanding as to what Ezekiel 4 is speaking of. It has nothing to do with how long a year is. Nothing to do with how long a year is.
What I have found is that there are, in fact, 12 30-day months to a year, which gives the year 360 days, plus 4 separate days not tied to months that mark the beginning of 4 seasons, making it 364. But it isn't that cut and dry. First, the last day of the year is also the start of the next year, so the count is 364 theoretically, but 363 on paper. Also, there is an extra added bonus to the year every so often, and this corrects the season shifts we see in the strict 364-day count. And this interpolated bonus is actually scriptural. In the book of Ezekiel, specifically chapter 4, a command is given to Ezekiel to symbolically bear the iniquity of Israel by laying on his side a number of days for the sins of Israel that had accumulated over the years.
As for you, lie down on your left side, and lay the iniquity of the house of Israel on it. You shall bear their iniquity for the number of days that you lie on it. For I have assigned you a number of days corresponding to the years of their iniquity, 390 days. Thus you shall bear the iniquity of the house of Israel. When you have completed these, you shall lie down a second time, but on your right side, and bear the iniquity of the house of Judah. I have assigned it to you for 40 days, a day for each year.
This scriptural event actually supports Yah's fixed calendar and locks in the seasons and feasts so that they do not shift from year to year. but it takes a bit of discernment, which Yah supplies in great abundance if we ask in faith. Now, according to verses 1 and 2 of Ezekiel chapter 1, this command came in the 5th day of the 4th month during the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's exile. When we arrive at Ezekiel chapter 8 and verse 1, Ezekiel is finally allowed to move and is shown sitting in his house with the elders of Judah sitting before him, and the hand of Yah fell upon Ezekiel once more. We are told that it was the 6th year of Jehoiakim's exile and the 5th day of the 6th month. So the period of lying on both his sides had lapsed. Adding 390 days and 40 days gives us a total of 430 days. And if we're going by regular 30-day months, as some still hold to, not counting 4 separate season days, the year would total 360 days. Using 30-day months as our count would give us a total of 420 days from the time Ezekiel began laying on his side to the time he was allowed to get up. Using the Enoch calendar, on the other hand, which adds an additional 4 season days to the count, would come to 424 days total. These are both shy of the 430 days Ezekiel was commanded to lay on his side. But when you add an occasional leap week to the calendar, 7 days that do not disrupt the 30-day months, there is no shift in seasons from year to year. And the book of Ezekiel proves that from years 5 to 6 of Jehoiakim's exile, a leap week was employed.
Now, breaking down the leap week. Now, what makes this something a little bit easier to deal with is because those who teach the leap week don't disagree with the 364-day calendar. They have no disputes with the 364-day calendar. However, they do believe that there should be occasionally there should be an extra 7 days or a week added to the end of the year. Today, we'll be breaking down how they got there. How did you get to occasionally, every now and then, we have an extra week? Let's get Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1.
Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 13th year, in the 14th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river of Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of the Most High. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so those who teach the leap week believe that this is the day that Ezekiel was given the commandment to lie on his side, right? On day 5 of the 4th month in the 5th year, right? So in our calendar, it will be 4-5-5. So it's day 5 of the 4th month of the 5th year. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Let's get Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 1.
Ezekiel chapter 8 and verse 1. And it came to pass in the 6th year, in the 6th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I sat at mine house, and the elders of Judah sat before me, that the hand of the Most High fell there upon me.
Okay, so this is the end date, right? This was after Ezekiel finished. He finished his 430 days, right? Because we know that there's 390 days of the iniquity of Israel that he had to lie on his side for, right? Mm-hmm. And then there was 40 years of Judah's iniquity that he had to lie on his side for. When you add those two together, you have 430 days. Ezekiel chapter 8, verse 1 is after he finished. He had already finished. Here it says that he's sitting with the elders of Judah. That means he's done. His 430 days are finished. This was on day 5, same day of the month. Day 5 of the 6th month in the 6th year, right? So this is a year later. It's in the 6th month, 2 months after he had originally began, in day 5, right? So this is the end of the 430 days he had to lay on his side. To calculate what they use is they take the start date from Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1, right? Which is day 5 of the 4th month in the 5th year. And using the 364-day calendar, this is what they do. They know that a year has 12 months, right? Mm-hmm. And they know that each month has 30-day months, right? Mm-hmm. So if you know that there are 12 months with 30-day months, they multiply that 30 by 12, and they add the 4 season days, because we know that there's 4 seasons, and each day and each season requires a day of season change. So you have a full 90 days in one season, plus the season changing day, right? We went over this in the lesson on the Hebrew calendar. So using this, they count the number of months from the beginning to end, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go over that one more time. To calculate, they take the start date and add all the days in between using the 364-day calendar. So they know that in a year there are 12 months. And within 1 month, there's 30 days. So they multiply 12 by 30, right? And then they add the extra 4 season days. So but this is only a part of the mathematics. This is only a part of the mathematics. They also count the number of months from month 4 in the 5th year to month 6 in the 6th year, in the next year, which comes out to 14 total months, right? So that means from month 4 to month 16 is 14 months, exactly, right? Because we have to remember that on the 4th day, it was the 5th day of the 4th month, and it ended on the 5th day of the 6th month. So they ended on the same day of the month. It's exactly 14 months, okay? So you take the number of months, which is 14, then you multiply that, then you take the number of days within a month, 30, and you multiply them. So it's 14 times 30, right? When multiplied, it comes out to 420 days, right? So we know in every month there's 30 days, and we know within a year there's only 12 months, okay? So you take the 14 months from month 4 to month 6 of the next year, and then you multiply that by the amount of days within a month, 30. So it's 14 times 30. And when you multiply that out, it comes out to 420 days. 10 days shy of the 30-day mark. But you have to add in the 4 season days. The 4 season days, right? When you add 4 to 420, you get 424, which is still short of the 430-day command in Ezekiel chapter 4, right? By exactly 7 days or a week, right? Because Ezekiel can't stop on the 30th day, right? On the 430th day, he can't stop. He has to stop the day after that. So he will have to finish on day 431, right? So because of this issue, they believe that the Enoch calendar alone can't be it, right? Because if you have exactly 14 months and you multiply that by 30, you get 420. You take into account the 4 season days, that's only 424 days. So they come to the conclusion that between the year 5 and 6, there was a leap week. There was an occasional leap week. The 7 days that they say are missing from the Enoch calendar, right? If you add 7 to 424, you get 431. That's the correct day that he's supposed to be over, right? The day that he's supposed to end. Mm-hmm. But they say that there's 7 days missing. This is simply a mistake from not reading, right? They believe the date that they say is the start date is incorrect according to Scripture. They believe that his start date was Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1 through 2. But that was only the first time the Most High came to Ezekiel. He came to him twice. Let's get Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1 again.
Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1.
Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1.
Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the 13th year, in the 4th month, and on the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chebar, that the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of the Most High. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity.
Okay, so this is the date that they believe is the start date, right? Day 5 of month 4 in year 5, right? However, there's two chapters in between chapter 1 and chapter 4. You have to read in between. You can't skip from chapter 1. You can't go to chapter 1 and skip straight to chapter 4. There's something in between that you're gonna miss, right? So the first time, this is only the first time that the Most High appeared to Ezekiel. Those that teach the leap week jump straight from Ezekiel 1 to Ezekiel 4 and skipping over everything in between. They go straight from Ezekiel 1 to Ezekiel chapter 4 and everything in between gets lost. This is where the issue comes in. Let's get Ezekiel chapter 3 verse 15.
Ezekiel chapter 3 verse 15. Then I came to them of the captivity at Tel Aviv, that dwelt by the river Chebar. And I sat there, and they sat, and remained there astonished among them 7 days.
Oh, read that again.
And remained there astonished among them 7 days.
Read verse 16.
Verse 16. And it came to pass at the end of 7 days.
At the end of how many days?
7 days.
Exactly 7 days. Read.
That the word of the Most High came unto me, saying.
Wow. The 7 days or week that they claim is missing is actually there. They started a week too early. When you start in Ezekiel chapter 1 verse 1, you're missing the 7 days that passed in Ezekiel chapter 3 verse 15. Right? It was just skipped over. What a simple mistake. Something so small and minute, and you built a full calendar off of this one small mistake. Right? When you start in month 4, day 12 of the 5th year, which is 7 days after the start date in Ezekiel chapter 1, right? Because Ezekiel chapter 1 says day 5 of month 4 in year 5. But when you add 7 days and you start from month 4, day 12 in the 5th year, you come out to exactly 431 days as the Most High commanded. Exactly. So the 7 days that they believed were missing were there the whole time. Right? There was no leap week in between year 5 and year 6. It was a regular year. 364 days. Once again, these scriptures in Ezekiel have nothing to do with how long a year is. Don't get me wrong. Even though we just proved that the Enoch calendar works within Ezekiel chapter 4, that's not what it's talking about. Ezekiel chapter 4 has nothing to do with how long a year is. However, there are a lot of new believers falling to this simple mistake and ignoring the command that the Most High gave us in the book of Jubilees. Right? The book of Jubilees gave us a specific command. Right? It says to keep the year 364 days only. That's it. That means you can't add more. You can't add a leap week. You can't take away a week. It's 364 days only. This small, simple mistake is throwing people off. Right? Those who are teaching the leap week simply missed a passage in Ezekiel chapter 3 where it said that the week had already passed. The 7 days came to an end, and that was the day that the Most High came to him. Again, that's why it says at the end of Ezekiel chapter 3, verse 15, it says, and the word of the Most High came to me unto me, saying. That was the Most High coming to speak to him the second time. Right? Let's get Jubilees chapter 6, verse 38. Scripture says to prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. Read.
Jubilees chapter 6, verse 38. For this reason I command and testify to thee, that thou mayest testify unto them. For after thy death, thy children will disturb them, so that they will not make the year 364 days only.
How many?
464 days only.
364?
364 days only.
Plus a leap week?
364 days only.
Only 364 days. Read.
And for this reason they will go wrong as to the new moons and seasons and Sabbaths and festivals, and they will eat all kinds of blood with all kinds of flesh.
When you tamper with the calendar that the Most High gave to us, everything is thrown out of course. Right? Everything and everybody is thrown off of course. The new months, the seasons, the Sabbaths, the festivals. If you're doing an extra leap week, imagine what that's doing to the rest of your feast days. You're throwing your feast days off by a week. You can't do that. The Most High says 364 days only. Right? This is the way that we're supposed to observe it according to Scripture. Right? And that is the conclusion of the lesson. Ezekiel chapter 4. Breakdown of Ezekiel chapter 4. I hope everybody was edified by this lesson. I hope everybody understood. Bless all of you. Have a wonderful Sabbath. Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.